manage those questions. If I can't get through them all in the time, as I say, we'll answer them offline and make sure everyone gets to see the answers. So now I've officially welcomed you. I've done the housekeeping. I'd just like to say that it's really good to have this summit. When we merged Grape Growers and Winemakers back in February 2019, the summit was a regular part of the Vignerons program. It's great to be able to reintroduce it this year. We've now had a year of a merged operation, and I think we're managing to meet grower and winemaker expectations certainly as well as we can. We've got a really busy year. This has kind of been the year from hell. There's been a lot of, issues. We started off with bushfires. Not everyone was affected by bushfires, but it did affect the whole country. It did affect tourism. It did affect demand, and it did affect directly a number of growers and winemakers. We moved into COVID-19 seamlessly. I think we moved into COVID-19. That will continue for a long time now to have a great economic impact on the industry. And most recently, we've had the announcement of the China anti-dumping investigation. That happened on the 18th. We will probably have tomorrow the announcement of the China countervailing duties investigation, which it will happen and go in parallel with the anti-dumping. So for an organisation like ours, we've got a fairly busy agenda. For businesses like yours, these will all have direct impact on profitability, demand, and what happens over the next few years. So we won't be talking about China today, but we will be talking about China. We'll probably put another seminar on at a later date when we've got some time to breathe and make sure that everyone's aware of what we're going. But in the meantime, just come onto our website or ring us up and talk to us about what's happening. So I'm now going to move into the program. I think we've got a really good program talking about relationship between growers and winemakers, which is a matter dear to my heart, and how to improve those. We're talking about water. We're talking about a whole lot of other issues. And then I think we've got some really good speakers to finish off, which talk on the demand side for both wine grapes and also in the product side, which I think are very interesting. And I've been fortunate enough to see what the presentations will look like. So with no more ado, I'm going to introduce Peter Hayes. I don't think I really have to introduce Peter Hayes. Peter's been around for a long time. He's got the same amount of hair as me, but he's got a lot more wisdom. He's obviously been very involved in all sides of the business, from research through to practical viticulture, through to working with big companies. And he's a man known for his integrity and honesty. Peter, we use Peter for our code of conduct work as an independent chairman. Because of this, Peter is well respected. And I think that we're starting off with discussion about the code of conduct is really important because it brings to the heart of how we're going to be a more efficient industry, and that's better relationship with growers and winemakers. So Peter, I'm going to put you on for 5 minutes and then we'll go into some of the detail of the program. So over to you, Peter.
Thanks, Tony, and welcome everyone. It's great to have this opportunity to see people at a distance, even if it's not the perfect way of doing it. I've reflected on the progress that we've made with the code over the last year, and I think it's a year since Tony asked me, would I take this task on as an independent chair to review the old code, to reflect upon the ACCC's review and recommendations. And so when I look back, I realised we first met as a committee on the 3rd of September, with this particular task in mind. At that time, we clearly looked at the principles under which we're operating, accepted the list of principles that you see in the documents that have been circulated. And I think from that sort of base set of principles, we tried to take on the task of reviewing the recommendations of the ACCC, reflected on the old provisions of the code, and went through the process of did we throw it out altogether or did we try to radically upgrade it. In the end, the decision of that group was to upgrade and encompass the recommendations of the ACCC as best we could. Finally, I guess, and I'm an optimistic cynic in some ways, we certainly didn't get all the distance that we would have liked to. We certainly didn't get a consensus outcome, and we certainly got to a point where no further progress could be made with this group as it was then. So Tony, as CEO, made the call that with the agreement as far as we could get, that would be taken forward for broader discussion, promotion to candidate signatories to the code. And of course, people are at liberty to pursue other better provisions as time went on. But equally, we definitely locked into the code as best we could take it, this intent to progressively improve and see continuous improvement as an underlying element of the code in its proposed form. So Tony's already highlighted the fact that we landed on in the COVID-19 situation early in the year, and I guess we had some overhead anxiety about Chinese markets, certainly impinging on the latter parts of our discussion. Nevertheless, the things upon which I think we've made progress were a very clear intent to see better market information and accessibility progressively delivered through the year to growers organisations, and with the capacity for those organisations to process it and deliver it to members. We have seen a very clear commitment to making price offers, not indicative pricing, but price offers earlier in the course of the year, early in December, still not as early as many would like, but probably a week or 10 days than the old indicative pricing. We have seen for all a minimum terms of payment equivalent to the current South Australian regulation, with a strong encouragement that people progress towards better, more commercial, more current, modern commercial terms of payment. We have seen a dispute clause clearly stated with two elements to it, a focus around time-critical issues, that is, in the vineyard and at the weighbridge, what things are time-critical, and strong attention paid to that, with other less time-critical ones to be directed down another path. And we have seen a good progress on much more clear and refreshed objective measures. They will be rolled out and trialled over the course of this forthcoming year. So to summarise, I think where we're at is we've seen progressive improvements built into the exercise, and we see a realistic prospect, and Tony will reflect on this, of a much enhanced buy-in of signatories to the code. Thank you, and I'm certainly hanging around for questions, and I think more detail will be flushed out then. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. A really good overview, and I'd also like to thank you for your time you've given to this. For everyone's information, I don't pay Peter; he does it because he's a mate. I'm just going to introduce Anna Hooper, who most of you know, but was a former on the Vignerons CEO and has now joined Australian Grape and Wine in the merge, and she's had the unenviable role of Secretariat to the Code of Conduct Management Committee. We're fortunate having Anna because she's got the practical experience of being in the grape growing and winemaking business, so that brings that practical experience with a really good policy mind. So Anna's going to take us through the draft code. I'd like to just remind everyone that if we're relying on a code, then we're in trouble, because the code is a guide and the code is meant to bring bigger and better relationships. So we've got to remember, we don't want excessive regulation, we want flexibility, and we want people to work better together. So a code, black letter law is not always the best solution. So Anna's going to bring us through the draft code, where we're up to, and how we see it playing out. Thanks, Anna.
Thanks, Tony. Hi, everyone, and I wanted to just start by saying it's nice to see some familiar faces in the audience, but also that this is really exciting to have this important job of talking about the Australian Wine Industry Code of Conduct planned for release next month. It's been the result of a lot of very hard work, extensive consultation with stakeholders, and some, as Peter sort of alluded to, a few challenges along the way. So it's really exciting for me to be here talking about this, but why I'm sure you're all wondering why it's exciting for you and why we need and want an industry code of conduct and why it's so important. Well, as most of you probably know, we've had a code since 2008. However, this new version has arisen from extensive consultation, but also a review of the ACCC study into the wine grape market last year. And we've made a dedicated quest to solve the problems that they revealed in that study. Before I go on, just quickly, the ACCC is the Commonwealth Statutory Authority whose role is to enforce the Competition and Consumer Act, and they're regulators when it comes to competition and fair trading. Therefore, they're quite interested in industry codes. And in some cases where they see a serious market failure, they'll impose or they'll advocate to government that a mandatory code be imposed on industry, and we don't, fortunately, that's not been the case for us. So our code is a non-prescribed voluntary code. The alternative, a mandatory code, tends to be much more intrusive. They're compulsory, they're regulated by government, and they're less flexible and adaptable to change. And this is something we don't think would be constructive, so we've been working hard to try and avoid that situation. A mandatory code also tends to stifle innovation because it's less flexible in terms of what people can do in their contracts. And the idea of an excessively regulation is at odds with the idea of a competitive market, which is what we want. Codes such as ours are really about informing expectations between two parties and aiming to improve that business-to-business culture. Codes should encourage competitive markets. So what this means is sellers are not just encouraged to compete on efficiency, but to improve the quality of the goods that they create, because they're confident that they'll receive due reward where due reward is due. Our code has been developed for the Australian wine sector by Australian Grape and Wine Incorporated and our Code Management Committee. It's industry owned, developed for industry by industry, and as both Tony and Peter said, the result of months of voluntary time and effort from our committee, some legal polishing by Finlayson's lawyers, and probably important to note that the committee that developed this code had equal representation from winemakers and growers, and this was really important. It included grower representative bodies, and the reason it was important to have everyone is that even though it's winemakers that sign up to the code, it's really important that we're addressing the needs of the growers. So many of the improvements of the code have come about following that ACCC study and careful consideration of the ACCC advice, and really seeking to address the issue of a perceived imbalance in bargaining power between winemakers and growers, and potentially whereby growers are left unfairly more exposed to risk. So we've worked, part of this has been working with Wine Australia to generate better market information, and we're going to hear from Sandy on that later. But also worth noting that the ACCC market study did a lot of the consultation for us. There was 262 grower surveys as part of that, and 55 submissions from both grape growers, winemakers and industry bodies, and a 140-page report, which I now think I know off by heart. So the purpose of the code, and this is outlined in the code itself, is it's simply to improve grower winemaker relations, to provide a framework to support fair and equitable dealings, and really a cost-effective dispute resolution process, which can be a good alternative to legal action. And so I'm just going to go through some of the key benefits, but before I do so, it's important to note that it was one of the really important balancing acts that was in our mind when we developed this code, was that we needed to satisfy the competing interests of a range of disparate groups, but at the same time we needed to have enough flexibility within the code that would not put off potential and existing signatories. And as Peter said, some of the more difficult issues have been around payment terms and how pricing information is conveyed in contracts before harvest. And the ACCC suggested removing the old requirement for indicative pricing, which everyone was pretty supportive of, but there's still the option to have market-based contracts, and I'll go into that later. The new version of the code has other improvements around ensuring contracts are lawful, which means that they're less likely to be found unfair if they were to be challenged in a court, and also satisfying that objective we all have talked about improving grower winemaker relations. So some of the highlights, as I see it, are about harvest and delivery arrangements. So the code mandates that certain aspects must be documented in agreement so that they're known and they're clear and transparent, and other tips for best practice that winemakers might consider so as to give more certainty to growers about how risks associated with things like harvest delays and logistical problems, that risk is shared, how that risk might be shared. Price transparency was a really important one, and we've aimed to provide confidence regarding mechanisms for determining price, and that was a really key issue raised in the grower survey. There's sufficient flexibility still so that winemakers and growers agreements can encourage quality improvement, which is also really important to maintain. And so price doesn't necessarily need to be determined at the time of entering into a long-term agreement, but growers must have some certainty about how and at what point in time that price will be provided to them. And this enables things like quality-based incentives where pricing reflects, and also pricing that reflects the market at the time, or a combination of both. Winemakers have the flexibility to offer their growers upgrades or bonuses by providing a base price which can be adjusted up at any time, but still providing the grower the confidence that the price cannot be reduced unless the growers fail to meet objective specifications. So market-based price offers must be determined by the second Wednesday in December or in January if you're in a cooler region. However, objectively calculated prices can be, or upward price adjustments can be made at a later date. Quality assessment is obviously closely linked to pricing and relates to how we assess grape quality for the purpose of making decisions about rejections, downgrades or upgrades. And grapes are generally assessed in the vineyard, but also occasionally at the winery against maturity, purity and condition, or MPC standards, maybe BOME, pest and disease, etc. Deductions and rejections are not allowable under the new code unless the grapes have failed to meet these types of objective specifications. And you'll probably need to have some evidence to support any downgrades or rejections documented in the case that there's a dispute. The AWRI is developing standard procedures for a number of these measures, and these will be endorsed by industry. And that's part of the development of industry endorsed standard procedures for measurement of specifications. Where these exist, they'll have to be followed. In practice, it's also common that grapes or wine are assessed for other quality measures that might rely on partly or wholly on personal judgment and therefore may be prone to ambiguity. And this is still allowable for the purpose of upgrading and bonuses, which was what people wanted to maintain, but must be done against a non-base price. So subjective measurements can be used in certain situations, but they can never be used for assessing a quality measure where there's an objective measure that can measure the same thing as effectively. And just finally on quality assessments, the timing and methodology of these assessments should be specified in a contract, so the grower's aware of when and how these decisions will be made. As has been mentioned, the dispute mechanism has been expanded and strengthened, and this has taken on board ACCC advice as well. So there's now a structured process for reviewing how quality assessments have been made in both the vineyard and at the weighbridge through independent expert determination. And we're looking for more independent experts. So if anyone's interested in becoming that person that goes out and assesses a vineyard in the case of a dispute, then please get in touch. But the code now, in terms of dispute resolution, also has a process of conciliation, which is a little bit like mediation, which will assist people in resolving all types of contractual disputes. Payment terms were probably involved some of the most serious discussion when we deliberated about the code, and we really seriously considered the pros and cons of mandating for shorter payment terms, but concluded that payment terms were a matter for commercial decision making, and that we needed to get people to pay heed to this general principle that money is worth more the sooner it's received because of risk and the increase in value when that did once occur. Payment terms under the new code, in the end, after extensive deliberation, remained unchanged. So based on the 3-tiered payment plan that's in line with South Australian legislation. But it should be stressed that these payment terms should not be considered as industry norm. These terms are a bare minimum, and the code also makes note of the fact that lengthy payment period in contracts may be found to be unfair under Australian consumer law, depending on the contract, and also that the ACCC has recommended long payment periods be phased out in favour of 30-day payment terms. So we need to see an improvement in payment terms over and above what's in the code. The code also states that the signatories should pay interest if payment terms are not met. So how do you become a signatory? As I said before, we really need winemakers to sign up to this code, and we need to be able to demonstrate that the vast majority of grape purchases are from code signatories. So this means that any winemaker producing over 10,000 tonnes should become a signatory without question. This is the view that the ACCC hold, and failure to achieve a significant uptake in signatories will likely result in a mandatory code of conduct. It will be quite different and much less flexible. So once you sign, signatories will be governed by the code in their dealings, and they'll have until the end of next year to amend their existing agreements so they're consistent with the new code. And they'll also, that might just simply involve making reference to the code in the grape supply agreement. Signatories to the previous code will automatically become signatories to this code unless they notify the code committee to the contrary within 1 month. Other work that we've been doing as part of this, other recommendations beyond the code, are the provision of supporting material that will improve transparency in both pricing and how quality assessments for the purpose of pricing and reduction are conducted. So we've worked really closely throughout the year with the AWRI, Wine Australia and the ACCC, and would like to acknowledge everyone that's been involved in this work to ensure that there's enough supporting material to support the code and really address the recommendations of the ACCC. I've also developed, in collaboration with AWRI, these industry guidelines for how wine grape quality assessment should be made, and these will be continually be improved over time, and it will include things like sampling protocols, just so that it's done in a much more transparent and consistent way. And also a major part has been this access to market information, so growers can make informed decisions about not only what prices they might be willing to accept, but also to understand supply and demand. So it might impact on how they make production decisions and risk management earlier in the season before prices have been announced, but it might, by having better market information, just have better access to information. Just to sum up now, the code is a really valuable tool for improving your grower contracts, ensuring they're lawful and fair, and also for resolving disputes in the unfortunate event they arise. We strongly urge people to sign up to the code, and I will send this information along with the new code to all those who've registered in the next few days. For us, it will be disseminated amongst our member base. And for further information about the code, or becoming a signatory, or even an independent expert, please don't hesitate to get in touch. And thank you very much for listening.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. And apologies, the audio went a little bit crackly there in the last couple of minutes. There will be time to ask Anna some questions after the next presentation. I think the critical element for me from that is that this is not a code that's set in concrete. This is a code that will evolve over time, and it's a code that will be very responsive to what people are putting into it. And some of the biggest benefits that are coming out of this process are not within the code, but they are some of the we've already seen contracts being improved after this. We've seen a number of contractual improvements. We've also seen on the information side that we've got improvements. And that brings me on very nicely to introduce Sandy Hathaway from Wine Australia, who's going to talk about some of the Wine Australia tools to help the grower decision making. So Sandy's been a senior analyst now in the market insights team at Wine Australia for, must be since about 2016, I reckon. You all know her through her role in the National Vintage Surveys and direct-to-consumer surveys. She's been around the industry for a long time and really understands the industry. Very pleased to have Sandy to present some of the better information that we're going to be in a position to provide growers to make decisions. So over to you, Sandy.
Thank you, Tony, and I'm hoping everyone can see my screen. Thank you also to Australian Grape and Wine for involving Wine Australia in this Grower Summit. Certainly the role of the Market Insights team is entirely to providing information for our levy payers, the grape growers and winemakers. And we've worked with Australian Grape and Wine to make sure that we have the right information presented in the right format that will help growers and winemakers make better decisions and work better together so that they're coming from a equal understanding. So I'm just going to give you a really brief lightning tour of some of the material that's easily available to you on our website. You probably won't remember everything in the presentation by any means, but if you just remember to go in, have a go, browse, search, sign up, and then if all else fails, ask, then I think you'll be able to find what you need. Now what I'm going to do is just switch my share to a live website screen so that I can show you what I'm doing. So this is the opening page of the Market Insights part of the Wine Australia website. So wineaustralia.com, Market Insights. You can start here on this home screen, but a really easy way in, say if you're a grape grower, for example, it would be here. So what we've done here is just suggested the 3 pages that are perhaps the most useful to grape growers as a starting point. So you could go here. This will take you to one of what we call the landing pages. So it's the same as up here. If I slide over this menu, you can see grape production and pricing there. That's the same landing page that I've just taken you to. And this has probably the key reports that are particularly useful to growers and relating to grapes and grape prices. The reports, you can read a bit of an overview to see what the reports are going to cover. Or you can scroll down to the listing and they will be listed in the order of the most recently updated at the top. So happens that I've just updated the regional snapshots, but I might just highlight the bulk wine market update is a good report that summarises the latest CIATI data on how Australian bulk wine is going on the world market. And so that's a particularly handy one. The National Vintage Report, I trust you're all familiar with. When that will document grape prices for the past year, and there's historical data as well. The Global Wine Supply Monitor will show you how the Australian wine sector is looking in the context of the global wine sector, because obviously the size of the global harvest very much affects the competitiveness of our wine on world markets. So there's a fair bit there you can browse through. And then other good places to look here. You can see if you're interested in seeing how markets are going, you can do that. You can look at our exports in this section here. And then this section here, supply and demand, again, that tends to summarize the state of play at the moment. So what are the global economic indicators? What's the global supply and demand like? And how does all that affect Australian grape and wine prices? You will find that some of these reports require you to sign in. I'm just going to come back to that, but first I just wanted to also show you these tools here. The Market Explorer is an easy way to look at high-level export and consumption figures in different countries without having to log in. And the Gross Margin Ready Reckoner it's actually a tool that's been on the website for a very long time. It's still very useful. You can plug in, you can be a winemaker and you can plug in grape prices and then put in all your various operating activities along the way, like storage, and then come out with a wine price at the end. You could also be a grower. You could do the same activity and see, what should a wine sell for based on a given grape price, which gives you that relativity between grape and wine pricing. So that's useful. And then over here in the news section, our market bulletins, which are published weekly, cover different topics in a really easy sort of 500-word article on something. And certainly if there's anything new published, like our latest export report, a new global wine supply update, anything like that, that will be in there. Otherwise, we might feature here, there's an article on Shiraz quite recently. You can then use the search tool, which is the other thing I wanted to mention to you. So within market bulletins, you might say you're interested in global supply. Put that in, you'll get articles related to that. You might put in grape prices. You'll see articles pop up, suggestions, or you can just follow the link there. So, so the market bulletins are a really good way of getting regular information, and you can actually sign up to receive these sort of sent to you by email. Another way you can search is in the broader part of the website up here. So this main search tool searches everywhere on the website. So let's say you've heard about the Climate Atlas and you're interested in knowing a bit more about it. If I type that in here, this will show me anything to do with the Climate Atlas, and it'll also show you where it is. So is it, you know, under the news section, or is it here? This is in our main section, growing and making wine. This looks like the proper feature on the actual Climate Atlas. There it is. You can follow up on it here. So there's good search tools there for you. Of course, Google's a good search tool too. You might find your way straight to an article on our website just by going through good old Google. So then there's signing up. Excuse me, I will just log out. If you're not signed up, you'll find that some of the reports you might be interested in have a little padlock next to them. And if you try and view them, you'll be told you can't. So this one is one I wanted to show you, the Australian Unpackaged Wine Export Snapshot. But because I'm not signed in, if I say view more, it'll tell me I need to sign in or register. So in my case, I can sign in. If you haven't yet created an account, you can sign up. And so as a grower or a winemaker, you're entitled to levy payer access to all the restricted reports. So you sign up here. I have to say though, if you're a grape grower and you sign up with your ABN, there's a fairly good chance that our system, which is not perfect, may not recognize your ABN, in which case you contact Market Insights straight away and we'll sort that out for you. Or you can sign up as a non-levy payer, and again, you can then shoot us an email and say, please, you know, here's my ABN, please sort this out. And we will do that. So I will just sign in now so that you can see the difference. So this is a brand new report we've just produced out of our exports, because we've got a whole new data warehouse as well. So the Australian Unpackaged Wine Export Snapshot, useful, again, tied in with the CIADI data and the Global Supply Outlook, just to look at how, you know, that commercial level wine is going, which is a really good way of seeing the base level of competitiveness for Australian wine in the world market. Press download. It's downloaded to the bottom of my screen here, and I can open it, and that's the snapshot there, which is a PDF which you can then print or download yourself or just have a look at. And we are actually working on a whole series of new dashboards which will be coming before the end of the year, where you'll actually be able to see these sorts of things live on the screen, and you'll actually be able to make some selections and change filters and stuff like that. But and you won't just have a flat PDF. So you'll be able to do all that. And that is mainly the stuff I wanted to cover. I went super fast, and I've actually probably got a little bit of time up my sleeve. But I'm just going to switch back to my presentation. Just to say that the last thing about Ask is, if you can't find what you're looking for, or you have any trouble with your email address, or you just want to say, you know, Market Insights team, can you tell me, you know, how's the domestic market going at the moment? I can't seem to find what I want. Email market.insights@wineaustralia.com. We are very, very happy to answer that question. There's three senior analysts and our manager in the team. And as I say, our whole role is to support levy payers and exporters with this information. So we will get back to you very quickly with the best answer we can come up with. Can't promise that we'll have the answer to all the questions, but we will certainly try. Thank you, Tony. That's it from me.
Thanks, Sandy. And just a couple, I think the big outcomes from this process we've been going through is that we will get more targeted reports that will suit growers' interests, and particularly around understanding how pricing will be formed and potential price, the potential prices for the next vintage. So that's something that we're working closely with Wine Australia on. I've got a couple of questions. One of the disadvantages of someone like me who gives out his mobile phone to everyone is I've got some directly on my mobile phone. And so I'll go to them before I go to the ones on the chat. The first question I've got is, when are supermarkets going to apply the same terms of trade as to people who sell into them as some of the other markets? So I don't know if you noticed, but today David Littleproud announced that there would be a further inquiry into supermarkets. This was dealing with fresh produce, but also looking at in marketing power imbalances. And there's in our discussions with the Minister's office, he's talking about extending that out, and they've been watching very closely what we've been doing in our code development. So there's a lot of activity at both the ministerial level and at the with the ACCC in issues around market power, at the retailer level as well. So there was work going on at the retailer level. That's all I'll say. So the next question I have is there any comment on when the protocols will be available from AWRI? And that's one for you, Anna, I think. So the sampling protocols and the other information that we're doing there.
So we're working on the first thing that we're working on is the reference methods, which is for sugar, acid and colour, and they're being reviewed by a group of industry experts, and they'll be available for use for vintage. They should be accessible at the time that the code is released in September, probably later in September. The sampling protocols and the protocols for other vineyard type assessments will be, we'll need to road test them, so they'll be available for vintage in provisional form, so people can still use them, but they won't be mandated under the code until they've been tested. So yeah, the full set of protocols will be available in 2022, and the analytical protocols will be, analytical methods will be available in 2021.
Thanks, Anna. A couple of other questions. One is, how often is Wine Australia's ready reckoning used by industry? And can those numbers be shared? That's one for you, Sandy.
Yes, because I don't have it off the top of my head, but we can get that from Google Analytics. I'd be inclined to say not as often as it probably could be. It's a little bit hard to find. I've started trying to promote it more. It was also designed quite a long time ago, so it's a little bit clunky. But once you get your head around it, there's some really useful information in there. So how about everyone in this room give it a go and let's boost the numbers. If you would like those numbers shared, I can pass them on to you, Tony, and you can, if you're doing feedback after the webinar, we can do that.
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be really good. There's another question about how is Australian Grape and Wine going to treat and notify who signatories and non-signatories are and compliance of those, and whether there's any thought to looking at growers who do more advantageous payer terms or less advantageous payer terms that recommended in the code be made public. That's probably one you can address, Anna, or if you'd like, I could do it.
The codes maintains a list of signatories, and if signatories fail to comply with the code, then they'll be removed as signatories, but there's no naming and shaming under the code.
Thanks. And if I can add is, yeah, it will be a public list of signatories. One of the things is that I think it becomes very clear in the industry what payment terms are. It doesn't matter what you do in your agreement. So, and I think you're going to find that there's the discussions we've had around the code is actually going to lead to a lot more flexibility and a lot more movement on payment terms than we've seen before. But we have got the safety net that will now, with a greater number of signatories, give a lot more comfort to growers. So I'm very comfortable that we're moving in the right way. And if we don't move in the right way quick enough, then it will be forced upon us. I guess the other thing is there's a bit of a comment about the need for collaboration and how important it is for the wine sector, and how the code and conduct should be used, and is a good initiative to build on that collaboration. And that's a sentiment that I support. And I've always had the belief that the code is only part of the solution to the relationships issue, and it's something we all need to work on. So I think it's a really good sentiment. I have no more questions. So remember, if you think of a question later, send it in and we'll respond to it after this. And if you don't want your name done, send it privately and we'll also address it and respond to it. So I think we can now move on to the second session. So thank you to the speakers. That was a really good presentations, both of them. Really enjoyed it. And let's move on to session 2. So if I can introduce Phil Graham from Ruralco Water. His topic's on unveiling water markets. Now, water, of course, is pivotal to the sector, and the price of water is something that everyone loses sleep over. Phil's an associate of the Australian Property Institute. He's been a property valuer. He's been in water broking since 1998 and has a large client base. Since 2014, he's been general manager of Ruralco Water. So he's a man who's been around. He understands the brokering industry extremely well, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of value in his presentation. So Phil, with no more ado, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks very much, Tony. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to speak to you guys. And yeah, we certainly have a good relationship with the wine grape sector, so I'm pleased to be able to talk to you. Most of my presentation today is probably going to be focused on the Murray-Darling, and I know some of you aren't in the Murray-Darling, but I think what happens with water in the Murray-Darling probably has an indirect impact to a lot of you in terms of supply and demand for wine grapes, etc. And water, as you say, has become such a big thing for growers. It's a lot of times it's the biggest input costs, or it's probably the asset value is a major part of the total capital wealth of growers. So the entitlement values are important as well. So just briefly, we're part of the Nutrien Group now, which is the world's largest provider of crop inputs and services. And yeah, I'm based in Mildura, and I've been in water since 1998. I took over from my father, who was one of the early ones. But getting into the nitty gritty, and it has been a challenging 20 years for water. If we look at what data is available in terms of the inflows into the Murray, over the last 20 years, they've been down roughly 50% compared to the previous 120 years. So, that's a major change. And who knows, the next 20 years might be wetter than average. I'm not sure, but, with the climate change issue overlaid, it paints a picture that we all need to be alive to. At the same time, over the last 20 years, we've had the Commonwealth Basin Plan come in, and as we all know, the scientists did a study and came up with a number of 2,750 gigalitres, which had to be recovered from agriculture for the environment. And when that's all complete, that's going to roughly equate to about 22% of all the water that was issued change from using in ag to using for the environment. So that's a major fundamental shift in supply and demand there as well. And then over the last 20 years, as we all know, we've had a significant increase in permanent plantings through the basin. And whilst it's hard to get completely accurate data, our best guess is, over the last 20 years, there's potentially 25,000 hectares of new permanent plantings that weren't there before. And a lot of that is almonds, as we probably all know, but some of it is wine grapes, some of it is table grapes. And that has put a new level of demand into the market that wasn't there before. So a combination of those three things has created some issues for water availability, of course. Just, I guess, in terms of the big picture numbers that I think about, regularly in 08-09 or 07-08 millennium drought, the total water available in that year to growers from allocations from entitlements was about 1,400 gigs. Then when we have wet years, such as here, the total available is often 4,000 gigs or a bit more. The best data we've got now on what water is required to satisfy permanent plantings is that there's, as at today, there's probably about 1,400 gigs of demand of water required to satisfy permanent plantings. And that's growing. A lot of the trees are still young and going to demand more water moving forward. So in the not too distant future, we think that will go to 1,600 gigs. So year in, year out, there'll be 1,600 gigs demanded from permanent plantings. And as I said earlier, in the millennium drought, in the worst dry year, there was only 1,500 gigs available. So there's a shortfall there if we ever got back to this level of supply. So that's something we all need to be cognizant of, and hopefully government is aware of it, that we can't keep planting and planting and think there'll be no consequences, because if we get back to those particularly dry levels again, then potentially there, based on the numbers we know now, there may not be enough water to go around to cover permanent plantings, which causes all sorts of problems because, as we all know, the capital sunk into developing permanent plantings is quite significant. Just other sort of issues on this graph was 2016, we got down to a similar point to where we were last year, and then it started raining in spring and didn't stop. And then last year, we were obviously at a pretty dire sort of precipice. And if things didn't sort of turn around, we were heading towards getting back towards somewhere near the millennium drought levels. But positively, it has turned around, and things this year are looking much better. The total active storage is up. I can't see on my screen here because I've got my head in the way. I'll just minimise that actually. Yeah, total active storage, we're saying at the moment is 50% compared to this time last year is 46%. That's actually a little bit misleading because that only accounts for the Murray dams. If we add in the water that's in Menindee, which is about 450 gigs, and the much improved position of the Menindee, of the Murrumbidgee dams and Eildon, we're probably up to somewhere around 62 or 63% active storage compared to 46 this time last year. So it is a much better position. April was really wet, as we know. May, June, July were a bit disappointing. August has been not too bad or pretty good so far. And we've got a very favourable outlook. According to BOM, we're La Nina alert, which is something like suggesting there's a 70% chance of developing into La Nina, and the peak inflow months for the Murray-Darling are sort of August, September, October. So if we can get the rain in the next short period of time, it will be very, very good for all of us. Just a couple of things here. The Murrumbidgee at the moment is doing really, really well. There was 100 mil rain over the dams last week or the week before, and Burrinjack's gone to 82%, and the allocations there, as we can see, are rolling out very, very well. General security has gone up to 32% and is likely to increase even further in the not too distant future. So Over there, it's wet and the allocations are really good. In the Murray, it's lagging a little bit. Hume and Dartmouth aren't tracking as well as what the Bidgie has or is, and you know, we're only on 24% on Vic Murray Zone 7 allocations at the moment. So they put out outlooks. We're tracking close to average, a little somewhere between dry and average under their outlook scenario, which has a big difference. If we went to the dry scenario, they're saying it will only get to 50% for the year, but under a wet scenario, it'll get to 100% by Christmas. An average scenario, 100% by Christmas. But I think with the weather forecast and the little sort of rain we've had over the last couple of weeks, we'll jump up towards average. So we should get towards 100%, I would suggest. You know, by sort of Christmas time, touch wood. Same sort of thing in the Goulburn, and SA, of course, has got to 100%, so that's great. Trade restrictions are really important, and it's really important, becoming more important. So it's critical that you guys understand how they work and what impacts they have. At the moment, for the Lower Murray zones, in SA Murray, New South below the choke and Vic Murray, we cannot get any water from the Murrumbidgee into those zones. We cannot trade any allocation from above the choke to below the choke, and we can't trade any allocation from the Goulburn to those zones. And hence that's creating price differentials. So we're currently around 240 a meg in the Lower Murray, but 155 a meg over in the Bidgie, and 170 above the choke and 180 in the Goulburn. The MDBA in their operating plan can call out water from those other, from the Murrumbidgee and the Goulburn, which creates back trade opportunity, which allows allocation to be traded into those zones, which creates an equalising effect and brings those prices closer together. It increases the supply available into our zones where the majority of wine grapes are. So we'll know more about that later, but it's likely around December, January, February, they'll allow some additional allocation to come out of the Goulburn and some additional allocation to come out of the Murrumbidgee. The Vic government are currently going through a process of looking at the rules about how water can come from the Goulburn into those Lower Murray zones, which potentially can have a big impact on us down here. So it's important that we keep an eye on that and make sure that it isn't necessarily changed for good, such that it's harder to get water down, because in dry years that will have a big impact on us in the Lower Murray. Just quickly, permanent entitlement prices, they've come back a bit, probably about 10% from last year. I guess a bit of one, we've come off a really dry year and it's rained. Two, there's a little bit of uncertainty around with the COVID, etc. But overall, I think the underlying fundamentals for entitlements are still pretty good. There's growing demand for food and fibre, and there's reducing supply. The Commonwealth still has to take more water out of the productive consumptive pool for the environment. So moving forward, the underlying fundamentals are still pretty strong, but they have come back from the peak of last year. Just, I guess, wanted to spend a couple of minutes on talking about a strategy. So it's really important now, as I said, water is probably the biggest input cost for a lot of growers. So it's really important you have a strategy and work out what you're trying to achieve. Is it to get the lowest cost? Is it to manage price variability? Or is it to sort of have a risk or a hedge such that you've got water for the property in extreme dry years? And often the best results come from a sensible mix of the available water products. So if a grower is doing nothing but relying on the temporary allocation spot market, it is very, very volatile and it's very risky. Conversely, if a grower has all of his water entitlements plus a bit more covered by all of his water needs covered by entitlements, it's probably in these days considered to be a relatively conservative position. And in the middle, there's a whole mix of products where you can manage risks. There's forward contracts now where you can lock in for multiple years at a fixed price on a given delivery date. There's long-term entitlement leases for 3 to 5 years, and there's also using carryover that's available in the market as well. So it's a balance between risk and capital, but I really encourage you to look at some of these products, particularly the longer-term products at the moment, because prices have come off, and if ever you're going to lock into a long-term water product, it's best to do it in a wet year. In a drought, everyone's chasing them, supply is thin and prices are high. But now there's more availability and prices have come off. So if you're ever going to do it, I'd consider looking at it this year. It looks as though we're going to have a bit of a wet year. Just finally, we've also had the ACCC look at the water markets, and our report, I think you guys said your report was 130 pages, our report was 534 pages, and the key things they're looking at, and this is a subject to a final report in November, and then obviously what government choose to do, they're looking at a licensing regime for water brokers and or investors in the market, which most people think will be a good thing, particularly giving brokers legislation so that we can operate trust accounts and manage conflicts of interest transparently, and there's an enforcement regime most people think is a good thing. They're looking at improving the trade processes and market transparencies. All water sales are recorded on state government registers, but they're clunky and the data isn't very good. So improving how data is captured and the quality of data in those registers is a very good thing. They're looking at harmonising the state fees. At the moment, Victoria charge $40 to process a temporary trade, South Australia charge $270 and take a whole lot longer. So they're looking at trying to harmonising that and creating a sort of an open digital protocol so that water market information is at your fingertips and live and current. Improving the market architecture, it's going to be some hard yards there. They're looking at the rules around carryover and how those intervalley transfers work. I'm not sure that's going to be any easy win for government to implement if we start looking at changing the nature of our water entitlements. I think there'll be a lot of resistance there. And finally, they're looking at governance. So there's so many government bodies that are involved in the water market, and they have overlapping areas of responsibility, and there's gaps that aren't covered. So looking at the whole of market governance. Overall, the interim report they've put out, I think is a real positive for the water markets to give some better security and transparency for you guys moving forward. And finally, just if you're looking for water market data, a good place to start is our website. We put all of our trades up there, we put all of our buy and sell orders, and it's live. So you can click on a parcel and you've bought it or you've sold it. And we also bring through what data is available from the state registers and put it all in one place. So I know I'm biased, but if you're looking to get a handle on which way, what's happening in the market and which way it's heading, it's not a bad place to start. You don't need to be registered. Anyone can look at it from just logging onto the website. And that's it for me. So yeah, hopefully out of that, you might have got one or two things about the water market that you didn't know before. And yeah, I'm available for any questions as required.
Thanks, Phil. Look, it's a fascinating and complex subject, and yeah, we're actively involved in the ACCC inquiry, seeking more transparency as well. So I think hopefully we'll get a good outcome for everyone. We'll hold the questions for Phil until the next, after the next speaker's presentation. So I'd like to introduce Peter from Thomas Elder Consulting. He's going to talk about basically business planning and pathways to success. Now, don't be put off by Peter's South African accent. He actually knows what he's talking about. He's got the skin in the game. He's been a viticulturist and winemaker. He's working at Thomas Elder, who are actually a really good industry partner in many aspects. So apart from also being a sponsor of the Future Leaders program, but they're also actively involved in the sector. So Peter's been around. He's got a good range of experience in the wine sector, and very much looking forward to your presentation, Peter. So over to you.
Thank you to that. And now the pressure is really on now. You know, once you start to mix countries into all of this, it becomes a very interesting field. So listen, thank you to the Australian Grape and Wine, so I can actually have the opportunity to have the discussion with you. So I'm just going to share my screen now for you. Yeah. All right. Basically, what I want to just let you all know is that here, the TEC team that we've got here, here's our first three. And we are all specialist consultants in our respective fields. As part of our strategy, you might actually need to diversify into certain areas to mitigate risk. And our team here at TEC stands ready to support you throughout all your future business endeavors. We've got our manager, and very, very capable agronomist Graham Page leading the whole team. And then there's Roop and Neil, who's looking after horticulture and anything that grow. If there's a problem, they can make it grow. Then we've got our livestock team, who's Bruce, Pip, and Michael. They're absolutely astounding in how much knowledge they've got between the three of them. So anything to do with livestock, ruminant technology, anything, these are the people to talk to. Now, when you get to strategic planning, it's a full field that is so difficult to discuss and encompass in this discussion. So I'm only going to focus in areas that, in my opinion, that I feel encompasses the essence of the planning, which is applicable to all the sectors of agriculture, irrespective if you're a grower or a wine producer or a retailer. A good thing to start with is with planning is rowing harder doesn't help if your boat is heading in the wrong direction. And it all comes down to asking the proper questions, like Einstein said. If I had an hour to solve a problem and my life depended on it, I'll use the first 55 minutes determining the proper questions to ask. And I think that is sometimes where we are lacking. We get so much entrenched in the nitty details of what we're facing. We don't take a bird's eye view of just stepping back and asking ourselves, are we on the right track? The 6 steps to strategic planning is to assess the industry, SWOT analysis, define your mission, define your goals, allocate the relevant resources, and determining the staffing and budgeting requirements. We'll start with assessing the industry, your competitors, and your customer trends. You need to take careful consideration of what is actually happening in the industry that you want to immerse yourself with. A lot of things popping up now is ready to drink and canned wines, low alcohol and alcohol-free wines, vegan wines, and also constant sustainable production. Is there macroeconomics which is coming to play that influence how people actually perceive their capacity to spend? Productivity, unemployment, and inflation comes into play there. Then you need to do a SWOT analysis. Before you can do a SWOT analysis, you need to think that is the effective plan that I'm looking at here truly applicable to what I want to do? The SWOT analysis critically evaluates your company's strengths, its weaknesses, the opportunities, and possible threats that you might encompass. Strengths can be broken down just in a couple of examples there: your staff, market positions, sales channels, products, and profitability. Your weaknesses can also be staff, inadequate staff, or unskilled staff, where you are positioning in the market, your margins, financial resources, competitive vulnerability, and even if you're missing products, which will give you a missing sales channel. Look at your opportunities. There can be complementary markets you can enter into, form alliances, or raise even extra funds and launch new products. You need to be aware of the threats that's posed to you. This is around the economy, the international trade relations, which is now very front of mind to all of us, losing key staff to different industries, and then the financial resources capacity and limited cash flow. You need to think of this process as an internal evaluation of your business. After that, you need to define your mission and your vision. And once the external and internal evaluation is done, you're in a good position to begin crafting your high-level mission statement and your vision statement. It defines the core reason for a company's existence, and it makes work more meaningful. It usually also helps to attract and engage passionate, like-minded employees. The mission statement is a short summary of an organization's core purpose, its focuses, and its aim. It usually includes a brief description of what the organization does and its key objectives. The mission is the what and the how. The vision, therefore, is a description of the organization's values, its aspirations, and the wider impact that it aims to create. It is the why. You need to define next step your goals. Once you know where you're heading and what you are up against from an industry and a competitive perspective, you are now in a position to start drilling down into specific business goals that will enable you to achieve that vision. You need to structure your goals to encapsulate the market trends and the customer requirements that you have identified at the beginning of the analysis. Then you need to allocate the relevant areas. As we continue to peel back the layers of the onions, we need to decide what specific objectives and initiatives we need to allocate to which areas in the business. Your specialized expertise resides in different areas, and it's up to you to ensure you've got a balanced spread of responsibilities so you can get full expression of that potential. You need to determine your staffing, your budget, and your financing needs. Once all of that's been done and quantified, you're now able to aggregate them into one centralized plan and budget. If you don't have the full financial resources you need to achieve the plan, you have one of two options. You can either lower your targets to a level that you can more easily afford, or you need to raise additional capital required for you to achieve your full plan. The next thing is, how do you outline your clear path to meet your business objectives? Setting those objectives requires making really tough choices, and you need to address the realities. Where's your business going? What's its strengths, and where do you want it to go? Once that you've made the decision of what you want your business to look like, then you can draw a roadmap and start setting objectives. These objectives are mileposts to guide you. We'll break it down into the following ones. First one, as always, keep it simple. Focus on the objectives that you know you can achieve in the given time frame. People tend to think that you need to contribute to every department objective in an end to spreading themselves too thin. You need to prioritize your objectives according to what the business needs the most. You need to be specific. When you are setting up your objectives, brainstorm the different ways you can reach those results and draw your action plan out so that you are more specific on how to achieve those objectives. The more specific you are, the clearer your expectations will be. You want to have concise objectives so that you know exactly what you need to do and how to complete your goals. Cascade objectives. They may be overwhelming if some of your employees don't understand and see how they and their jobs are contributing to the company's success. You must include them in this whole planning operation. Share your objectives so that all members of your organization are in alignment with your vision and structure. Make it measurable. Your key results need to have a unit of measurement. It's much harder to define goals that are not quantifiable. For instance, does an increase in market awareness of our product exist? Is a subjective measure. In these cases, ask yourself, how will I know when I've achieved my objective? You need to be realistic. You want to have goals that are attainable and challenging at the same time. However, the goals need to be set carefully. It can become very frustrating for employees when they keep missing the objectives if the expectations ignores the environment that they operate in. Make sure that your goals are challenging enough, but more important, they should be realistic. Break your key results into small goals. Mini goals is, as you can call them, within your key results. Knowing what you have to do to achieve your key results, make those objectives much more specific. Mini goals can help you to set up milestones as well, and there can be action items that you need to do. Celebrate and recognize. Reward and recognize yourself and the others when a milestone has been reached. Do not wait for the end of the objective to recognize the effort that everybody has put into reaching that milestone. Reward yourself for the incremental progress that you have made. How to understand your business strengths and the weakness, opportunities, and threats. Once again, the SWOT analysis we've used before will help you to build on that and address in what you are lacking. The first one is strengths. Strengths are the things that your organization does particularly well, or in a way that distinguish you from your competitors. Think about the advantages your organization has over its or other organizations. Your strengths are an integral part of your organization, so think about what makes it tick. What do you do better than anyone else? And what values drive your business? Then turn your perspective around and ask yourself, what are your competitors seeing as your strengths? Just remember that any aspect of your business is only a strength if it brings you a clear advantage. For example, if all of your competitors provide high quality products, then a high quality production process is not a strength in your market, it's a necessity. This is always the difficult one, the weaknesses. These are not personal weaknesses, but looking at the broad company-wide areas where we feel the company can improve. It's time to consider them, and you must be honest. If you're not honest in this regard, you might as well just waste your time in all of it. The SWOT analysis will only be valuable if you gather all the information you need, so it's best to be realistic now and rather face any unpleasant truths as soon as possible. Weakness, like strengths, are inherent features of a business, so focus on your people, the resources, the systems, and the procedures. Think about what you could improve and the sort of practices that you should avoid. Then, once again, imagine how other people in your market might see you. Do they notice as weaknesses that you might tend to be blind to? Take the time and examine them and ask yourself, what are you lacking? Opportunities. They're the openings and the chances for something positive to happen, so grab them. But you need to claim them first for yourself. They usually arise from situations outside of the organization and require an eye to what might happen in the future. They might arise as developments in the market you serve or even in the technology that you use. You need to be able to spot and exploit those opportunities, and that can make a huge difference to your organization's ability to compete and even take a lead in the market. Think about good opportunities you can spot immediately, and they don't need to be game changers. Even a small advantage can increase your organization's competitiveness. You should also watch out for changes in government policy related to your field. Also, other changes in social patterns, even population profiles and lifestyles can all throw up interesting opportunities. Be mindful of the threats to your business. That include anything that can negatively affect your business from the outside. Supply chain problems, shift in market requirements, even a shortage of staff or recruits. It's vital to anticipate these threats and to take action against them before you become a victim of them and your growth grinds to a halt. Think about the obstacles that you face in getting your product to market. You may notice that quality standards or specifications for your products are changing, and then you need to change as well. Technology is an ever-present threat because it evolves faster than we can even keep up with. Always consider also what your competitors are doing and whether you should be changing your organization's emphasis to meet those challenges. Be sure to explore whether your organization is especially exposed to external challenges. Be careful of bad debt or cash flow problems that can make you vulnerable to even small changes in the market. To put the analysis into action, once you've examined all four aspects, you're likely to be faced with a long list of potential actions to take. But before you just leap into action, look for potential connections between the quadrants of the matrix. Some of the strengths might actually open up to further opportunities. And you would even be more opportunities become available if you eliminate some of the weaknesses that you've identified. You need to sit down now and ruthlessly prune and prioritize your ideas so that you can focus your time and your money on the most significant ones. Refine each point to make your comparisons clearer. How do you engage your employees to, together with you, drive your business vision? The tone is set at the top. You cannot expect your team members to follow your vision if you yourself doesn't abide by it. Your employees are your biggest asset and also your biggest liability. It's up to you to lead by example and act in such a way that your staff trusts you and know that you are consistent in your actions. There are few things that are detrimental to the unity and efficiency of the workforce as constant uncertainty. There's also a way to actually look at the needs of people. McClelland have identified this as the three needs residing in us all. Although we might all exhibit a bit of each, we tend to have a dominant need. We've got the people with a need for achievement, people with a need for affiliation, and people with a need for power. I'm not going to go into all the details of how to break it all down, but what I want you to take away from this is a collective workforce is made up of individual human beings. They are all unique, and we should respect them as such. The strength lies in the diversity that we must all exhibit working together for this great industry. And if the plan doesn't work, don't change the plan, but never the goal. Thank you.
Thanks, Pete, and thanks for that really good presentation on the principles of strategy. We have got a few questions for everyone. I'll start off with you actually, Pete, because you're just fresh in my mind, and that is that strategic planning looks very nice, but as a grower, how is that going to add value to my business?
Well, if you don't do it, you'll be out of business. It's one of those things, it's like a pie in the sky thing, and it's warm and fuzzy, you know, there's big corporate literature around it and stuff that makes it look as if it's all, but at the end, the strategy is when I normally face this position with people, I ask them two questions. Do you want to stay in this business, or are you structuring yourself to get out of this business? And these are the kind of questions that you go with. And the level that you actually apply this to is really up to how in detail you want to be. But planning, like I said, we get entrenched in activities, and we're dead tired at the night when we lay in bed and we ask ourselves, we were busy the whole day. I've worked my ass off, but what did I achieve? At the end, did I get benefit out of that? Can I see it in my bank account or in my market position or something? Because we tend to work, we're busy moving money left, right, and center, but nothing of that ends up in our accounts.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. I can just add to that. I mean, given the fact the number of things that are coming down on our business at the moment, including China and COVID, the ability to have a plan in place and be able to be, you know, that gives you the flexibility to move within it. So we've seen its benefit of having a good strategy.
And if I can just add to that, the thing is the wine industry is almost like a punching bag of social structures as well. I mean, it almost doesn't matter what we do. We somehow put our foot somewhere wrong. So it's like walking on eggshells, and those bloody eggshells are all full of dynamite. I mean, so you need to plan your next step as careful as possible.
Thanks. A couple of ones for Phil on water. Any comments, Phil, on the use of recycled water and potential cost savings associated with this?
The recycled water issue is I think mainly around the urban areas, and as a percentage of water use in the Murray-Darling Basin, the urban areas is quite small. Probably what a bigger sort of issue is desal. So you know, Adelaide's got a desal, Melbourne's got a desal plant, and last year in the peak of the drought, South Australia you know, did a deal with the Commonwealth to allow an extra 40 gigs into the market to grow fodder, and there was meant to be another 40 gigs this year, but they've called that off. So you know, I'm not sure recycled water will do a great deal for the water market in its entirety, but you know, having the desal plant there in really dry years is a bit of a help.
All right, thanks, Phil. And while you're on a roll, a more specific one. So if we've got that 1,600 gigalitres required for permanent plantings, we know. So what quantity is needed for all the other uses, including annual crop and domestic? And then what's our plan to get water security for, I guess, all Australians? It's a pretty big question.
Yeah, in terms of water usage, you know, the 1,600 gigs for permanent plantings, the balance is made up of what I call annual crops. So we've got dairy, cotton, rice, corn, those sorts of annual crops where they have optionality. So in wet years like this year, they're gearing up and they're planting a crop. In dry years like last year we just came out of, they tend to choose not to grow a crop and sell whatever small amount of allocation they've got into the market to the permanent planting guys. So, you know, I think the total water use in a wet year is up around 4,000 or 5,000 gigs. The second part to the question in terms of what we can do to ensure water security, it's really difficult. There was an announcement this week where the Commonwealth is spending 600 million to increase the size of Wyangla Dam, which is in Lachlan. So that's helping water security there. There's constant talk around, you know, bringing water in from the north, and I think it is actual formal policy of one of the Queensland state opposition to really investigate that thoroughly. So potentially that may be a you know, something in the future, although it's, you know, it's been pretty hardly looked at over the journey. I think on farm efficiency, you know, we've still got to focus on that and do things better with less water on farm, because I don't think there is any silver bullet out there in terms of the Murray-Darling Basin and you know, inventing an infrastructure solution to try and give us better water availability each year.
All right, thanks for that. I guess next question is, well, it's probably for me actually. It's how do you suggest people should keep themselves aware of government policy changes that might impact on their business? Now, the simple response from me is that obviously you should join our organisation and we'll keep you in touch. But the more other question, I'll throw that back to Pete, and that's that I think any strategic plan needs to have an understanding and ability to understand what's happening. And just your thoughts on that, Pete?
Yeah, I can't emphasize this whole collaborating effect. I mean, if you ever, I mean, you must join these organizations, and remember, it's not marriage, all right? So there's different rules which apply when you get married and stuff. The organizations, there will be some of the things happening in organization that you are not happy with. So you cannot have it perfect, but the benefit will outweigh those things. So if we're not part of this and we don't collaborate and we don't share ideas, you will find that we become isolated little islands. And then once we're fragmented, it all breaks apart. So there are these industry bodies and people like the Wine Group, which actually do all the effort to do all this information collected for us together. So if we don't support people like you, I mean, we are going to lose that connection that we have to that constant stream of information.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. And I guess I can add to that. When I first took this job, on the first phone call I got, started off with "you idiot." I probably get that once a week. So, you know, people don't always agree with where we are, but you know, you've got to be engaged. And I think my point to answer that one is you've got to be engaged in whatever way it takes. But and the best way to be engaged is get in there and be active, and don't just sit back and wait for information, because I think if you do that, you're probably lost. I've got no more questions. So I would like to thank both the speakers, and you've got their details, so you can contact any of them about anything. You know, once you come on here, you're fair game to any one of our participants, so as long as you recognise that. But thanks very much for two insightful presentations. We're now going to have a break, which will start again at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time. Is that right? That must be right. So a short break, and then we'll recommence. So thanks everyone, and thanks to the speakers, and we'll see you all again soon. Okay, so you can now have a comfort break. All right. Welcome back, everyone. We are now going to commence our next session. I've got a lot of pleasure here introducing Paula Edwards from Wine Grapes Australia. Paula also wears many hats. She's going to talk about building successful grower winemaker relationships. But Paula also, of course, is chair of WISA, the Wine Industry Suppliers Association. So she works across the supply chain. A lot of experience. I shouldn't say that. That probably makes people think you're old, Paula, which, you know, of course, you and I are both young, youthful. But anyway, I think Paula's going to provide us a lot of good insights into what's a successful grower winemaker relationship. I think this is a critical element. It goes on from the previous themes. And Paul's also touched a little bit on that knotty issue of grape contracts and the key considerations around those. So I'm just going to ask Paula now to present. Thanks very much, Paula.
Thanks, Tony. Yeah, really pleased to be here and to be able to share some of my insights in how to be a supplier of choice. So I'll just share my screen. And right, so building successful grower winemaker relationships. So what does a successful relationship look like? Certainly doesn't look like that, us and them. Something that in my 30 years in industry, there's been a lot of that going on, you know, but that picture there just represents two people, different directions, different values, disconnected. You know, successful partnerships or successful relationships, they take two parties acting honestly, respectfully, and in good faith, all towards a common goal. So that would mean that, you know, you're pointing in the right direction, in the same direction together. So who are them and who are us? So growers, as you're selling grapes to a winery, you're the supplier and winemakers are your customer. And I know that sounds obvious, but you'd be surprised how many times I've heard growers actually state that they're the customer and that they should have wineries sort of meet a long list of their demands. Generally doesn't end very well. Tends to be only a year-by-year sort of transactional arrangement dictated by seasonal supply and demand. So it's, you know, it suits some people and others it doesn't, but it's certainly not a successful relationship. Supplier and customer interactions are critical. And those interactions are critical to make sure that you do have a successful relationship. The supplier's mindset and their behaviours are how they convey their personal brand to the customer. So whatever you're doing as a grower, what your mindset is or what your behaviours are, that's going to reflect in how you're perceived by a winemaker. So we have a lot as growers to have to do ourselves to make sure that we're, I guess, setting the right scene, giving confidence and showing engagement and to build that relationship. So, you know, that perceived value is of what you deliver a customer is everything. And overall, the transaction is much more than just a parcel of grapes. And I think we need to think about it in a much bigger perspective than just year by year, this is my grape sale. So, there's an influence of relationship in all of this. This diagram gives a bit of a simplistic view on how businesses can create a successful relationship with their customers. So what we'll see is on the top level, you've got winemakers and we've got growers. It's a simple transaction. It's a very basic transaction. There's winemakers operating independently, growers operating independently. There's a transaction of grapes, but there's not really any engagement or probably any conversation. It's pretty much all about me. What's in it for me? What's in it for me? Two people thinking the same way. So that gap is always going to be problematic, and there's always going to be a level of dissatisfaction if we can't sort of bridge that gap. The second level shows a shared understanding of each other's business. So Each party has a moderate, I'll call it a moderate level of understanding of their each other's business. They'll share and have some influence over each other's business in that within the Venn diagram where their circles are crossed. They've got that shared understanding, so they've got an idea of a common goal, you know, which is great, and it's a great starting point. And I'd say probably 80% of growers and winemakers sit in this position, and so we sort of feel comfortable. There's a level of loyalty, but there's more work to be done if we really want to have the best relationship we can. If we want to be a supplier of choice, and you want to be a winemaker of choice, because, you know, it's a double-edged sword, and we've all got responsibilities. The third level, with, you know, highly overlapped winemaker grower circles of influence, to me, it's the end goal. It demonstrates high functioning business partnerships. Those two businesses are closely aligned strategically, and they support each other. They'll support each other in terms of varietal decisions. These are some examples. Dedicated products. So, you know, a winemaker might choose to create a product based around the grower. Could be a single vineyard opportunity, something like that. But it's also a partnership where, you know, if you're not, you know, if you're growing, you've been growing C grade for years, all of a sudden your yields are dropping, maybe your quality's going up, but that winemaker only wants C grade. You've got a partnership where you can actually go have a conversation about, look, this isn't working, what can we do? Can we aim it at a different product? And you actually work together to get the best result, which is a win-win transaction for everybody. So, yeah, at the end of the day, the customer's perception is going to be your reality. So it's about how much you're prepared to put in to the relationship is probably directly proportional to what you'll get out. So if you're not going to put anything in, like at the top level, you're not going to get anything out. But if you put in a lot, you'll get more out. And it does take two. It is a relationship. It is like a marriage, and you know, and it takes work. So I guess a question for you guys to consider is, which circle of influence are you sitting in right now? Maybe you've got different circles with different winemakers. So some may be sitting transactionally at the top, where you really don't have any great relationship, but you might be selling to somebody else that you're very closely aligned with. And, you know, at the end of the day, we all have choice on who we want to sell to. And, you know, we can influence if we want to change. So, yeah, good food for thought in terms of where you actually sit right now. So a successful customer relationship or grower winemaker relationship, what does it take? So, you know, it takes pretty much communication, trust, honesty, accountability, delivering value, all of these combined. I'll go through them a bit by bit, but it's, you know, it's really important. I think the biggest one is communication. It's vitally important, but the one thing I would say is that if you are with all of your communication, it's got to be meaningful to build a relationship. You can't just communicate and it not mean anything. There has to be, it has to be tied to something that is meaningful and tangible and engaging. Otherwise, it's just guff, really. So communication's used to convey all these other aspects of what it takes as well. So, and that all forms part of that well-functioning relationship. So, and I guess in many cases, not all, but many, sometimes the communication a grower has with the winery is very close to harvest when they're doing a spot purchase of fruit and they're talking about tonnes and price. And that's it. And it's probably not enough. An ideal or a successful relationship is where you communicate regularly, and I'd say at a minimum every few months, if you can, and it is hard, we're all busy, but you do have to make that time. If, as a grower, meet them out in the vineyard so that you have an opportunity to show your efforts of what you're doing for them, because you are selling the goods, so you've got to sell yourself as part of it. This is all part of your own brand position as well as the grapes. So I guess the other thing in communicating is if you've got multiple buyers taking blocks, and these are things, and I know with a short time it's hard to cover everything, but if you've got multiple buyers, make sure you let them know where the fruit is allocated within a block, because there is nothing worse than two winemakers fighting over a patch of fruit to impact poorly on your own brand. So to do that, use tools, have maps, indicate rows, those sorts of things. Make it very clear what they're going to get. And if things start to not look as fruitful in the vineyard, like 20 vintage, then communicate to them that it might not be as much as they're going to get. The last thing you want is to not tell them anything. Silence is a big no-no in all of that. Trust. So behaviours build trust. So it's what you do throughout the season will impact on the perceived value of your relationships, and it goes both ways. It goes for the winemakers as well. So, but if you deliver what is expected, you'll gain trust as a reliable supplier. If you over-deliver on what's expected, or if you communicate well and you don't hide anything, then you're obviously going to have high trust levels, and that's critical for a good relationship. Honesty. So upfront honesty is always the best policy. If you've got an issue, raise it with your winemakers straight away. What that does is show engagement in your relationship. It builds trust and confidence between the two parties. And again, it's communicating properly. So accountability. So for me, I think this is a major factor in becoming a supplier of choice. As a supplier, and as a grape grower selling grapes to a winery, you need to be fully aware of your obligations of the relationship, and you've got to commit to delivering on them. We always get a curveball with weather and things like that will change it, but know what your obligations are and deliver on it. If you're not going to have, or you're not going to be a supplier of choice, because there'll be somebody else there doing exactly that, and then they will get the next opportunity and those sorts of things. So fulfill your obligations. Reporting. So, and most growers hate it. Hate filling out spray diaries. I hate having to send you my estimates. Well, the winemakers don't actually ask you to do it for no reason. They need to know how many tonnes there so that they can plan and make up for any shortfalls, or make sure that they don't overcommit themselves. So there's a reason for that. Same with spray diaries. They'll ask you to fill in spray diaries. Sometimes they'll ask for almost a half-season check. Some of them have their own systems. They're critical. They're part of what they have to do. It's part of their quality protocols. And as they're your customer, you need to make sure that you help them fulfill their requirements in what they need to do. And they can't do it without you. So that part of it is a partnership. And I've seen it go really wrong in a relationship with a grower and a winery running their own spray diary system, which very simple to use. Growers having a time frame to meet the input of the data, growers not doing it, having 2-3 warnings, and then actually losing a long-term contract because of that. And that's because they became what the winemaker perceived to be disengaged, a care factor of 0, and not not wanting to be part of a partnership. So they let the growers go. So, it ends up being a, it's an important part of it, and you can potentially lose really good opportunities if you don't sort of fulfil your end of the bargain and your obligations. Fruit quality. So always try to deliver within spec as agreed in a contract, and we'll talk about contracts later. But if you can't get it to spec, have a conversation, talk to them. So there may be other opportunities that can go. A winemaker doesn't want to see a grower fail, and so they'll generally try to work through if it is a good relationship, they'll work through an equitable solution. Another thing is seek feedback about your fruit. A lot of growers just send their fruit in and say goodbye and never ask about it. Don't forget, at the same time, provide your own feedback, because things go wrong in a winery as well. So, feedback's an important part of that accountability process. Wineries and winemakers should be open to this because, they want to see you improve, and, I'm sure they want to improve their processes as well. So good relationships have the confidence to deliver and accept feedback, and they should be able to have the confidence to accept it freely, and usually see it as a way to make positive change. So I'd certainly encourage more people to seek that feedback. And if it's negative, take the time to consider, what you've been told, view it openly, and just take it as a learning process. Don't take it personally. It's it's a good way of reflecting on what went wrong and making positive change. I guess there's a few things to be mindful of, and I do have a lot of, I do know a lot of great growers that every year they just want a price increase, a price increase, a price increase. If you have to expect greater scrutiny in the vineyard if a winemaker's paying more for fruit. So and price per tonne isn't the end goal here. I think it is about long-term sustainable relationships. But you've got to consider everybody expects value for money, and if they're paying more money, they will pay more attention. Another thing in terms of accountability is one that I strongly believe in is try not to leverage your in-demand fruit to sell your undesirable varieties. It's got the potential to put financial pressure on the person that's paying for your grapes, so you run a risk of not getting paid, and it's a short-term gain for the supplier, but for the customer experience, it's really not great. And at the end of the day, trying to have a good relationship, you shouldn't be making, it's got to be a win-win all around. The last one is delivering value. So I guess considering what else you can do. So if you take the time to understand your winemaker's business, it'll be clear where you have the potential to add value. So just some examples that we at Wine Grapes have done is we've assisted growers in the conversion to organic to meet our customers' growing demand. We've encouraged redevelopment to preferred varieties because of that need to, ongoing need to try and leverage better varieties to sell undesirable, and we prefer to actually make that change ourselves as growers and take ownership of what you have in the ground. And one of the other things we've done it's quality improvement projects to create higher performing blocks to meet customer demand. I guess perceived value is just as important. So a couple of things that you might want to reflect on is, and perceived value is what the overall package is. You as a grape grower and as a business, as a package, because, you know, winemakers have to deal with the people in the business as well as just accepting the grapes. So am I easy to communicate with is something that you might want to consider. And do I respond in a timely manner? Are the winemakers happy with my fruit? Do my winemakers want to offer me long-term contracts? And do I act on feedback? These are all things that you should ask yourself and just see where you are sitting. I think it's important to reflect on how people perceive you in business. So that's an important one. And another factor is being relevant. Few things can kill your business faster than actually becoming irrelevant to your customers. So, you know, it's a hard fact in business that change is inevitable. So, you know, what winemakers want one year might not be what they want the next, or in the next 5 years. So it's really important to understand winemakers' purchase decisions, why they make them, and I guess how we as grape growers can make the experience better. Best way to do it is by talking to them, not just assuming that their needs won't change or it's just the same every year. I think, and it's about that communication piece and having the confidence to have quite candid conversations. You know, as growers, we tend to stick to our knitting, but with, you know, greater competition and new technologies and changing demands, we've always got to make sure that we stay relevant in the mind of your winemakers. So we want to be the first one that they call straight after vintage to lock down the fruit again, those sorts of things. So the regular conversations are really, really important. And, you know, maybe some points to consider if you're wanting to start a conversation with your winemaker is to just sit them down and ask them what they're really needing. So what quality level do you need? Or is it, you know, what's your growing variety, or where are you getting your most sales, or where are you short in, what variety are you short in? Those sorts of conversations. Be relevant with the technology. So get savvy with your online spray diaries and use them. I mean, there's still many people that don't like to use, and we have there is a plethora of online spray diaries, things like available, and not every winemaker uses the same one, but you know, it makes life a lot easier if you do, you know, you do get involved, use them and use them timely. Have a conversation with your wineries about Sustainable Wine Growing Australia certification. This is going to become more and more relevant because wineries are going to be looking for that competitive edge in regard to their sales. And I believe that we're only touching on the surface in this area, but the one thing that is a bit of a standout at the moment is that it has to be considered in at the same value. So that's a conversation with each winemaker independently on whether they value it, whether they see it as an advantage, because, you know, it's obviously a bit of work, but it's about, you know, it's showing or demonstrating that you're being relevant and that you're considering how they can have a competitive edge. And then I guess another one is okay, you've got and I've gone on about this, but you've got an unwanted varietal. Probably consider whether it is time to make that change.
Thanks, Paula. Really appreciate that presentation. Really, really valuable, I think, to have someone who's
I haven't finished.
Actively involved. Oh, haven't you? Sorry, you went quite.
I'll be quick on the rest. Sorry, I won't be long. I'll just quickly go on about winemakers. So they should be. I mean, what you should expect from a winemaker. So they should be engaged. They should be aware of your business needs and pressures. They should provide you written evidence of your grape delivery within days of delivering, because it's your only proof of sale. So you should get a weigh note as quickly as possible. They should pay for your grapes on time and not 3 days late. Happens a lot. I guess they should also contact you to get onto your property. It's courtesy. You need to receive a fairly worded and realistic contract. And in that contract, they should be very clear on the specifications that they want to purchase the fruit in. So, and you shouldn't be receiving them just before harvest. They should make utmost effort to ensure your fruit isn't left to hang. And you should have that confidence to be able to have that conversation with them. And obviously giving you feedback on quality. So I'll quickly get through this. My last thing was grape contracts, because Anna did ask me to quickly touch on that. They're a financial asset to both you and the winemaker. So it guarantees supply and it guarantees income. So the contract actually allows both growers and wineries to define their business relationship and to ensure that each other's needs are all met. So as a bare minimum in a contract, you should always have one, and you shouldn't sell without one. You should have, and that contract should include block details. So the variety of the block, section, row numbers, it should be very clear and very specific. It should have the agreed price and the mechanism for any bonus payments and pricing renegotiations. It should have tonnes, including maximum and minimum. And you should be clear on whether you're selling just tonnes or you're selling an area of a vineyard. That can get a bit messy. Delivery specifications, so minimum of BOME, minimums and maximums. Assessment standards and rejection penalties should be included. And you should understand the basis of the measurement of the standard. So it can vary between contracts at the moment. So hopefully with the code getting on top of that, we'll have some clarity over that. And it also should have the term of the agreement and a dispute resolution process. They're the key things that should be in it. There are a few other things to be mindful of, just quickly in contracts. There are some poorly worded warranty clauses around wine quality well after a grower can influence it. You do need to have and probably get some legal advice if you have a contract that has something in like that in it, because it does provide a bit of a level of risk to the grower in that. And I think, and I know Will Taylor's touched on this with some papers through, but ensuring there's an opportunity to register a security of interest on the fruit's value, because title passes to the winemaker at the weighbridge. So you have no ability to claim back any, or if a winemaker goes into administration, you've got no recourse to get your money. You're an unsecured creditor unless you register a PPSR. So that's an important one for growers to become more and more aware of. If you're unsure of any clauses, ask your winemaker. And look at if you're at all uncomfortable signing a contract, you really, really need to go seek legal advice. So in summary, I think personal relationships, in personal relationships, fidelity is not bought, it's achieved with long-term attitudes that convey trust, respect, care and attention. So, and it should be the same it's the same in business relationships. So things to take away is, what is your mindset? What are your behaviours? So do you need to win at all costs, or is there some middle ground? And what can you do to change to have a meaningful relationship with your customer? So that summarises it for me. Sorry I took a bit longer. It's a long topic, bit of a passionate one for me. Thanks a lot.
No, thanks, Paula. That was fantastic. I mean, it all comes down to that relationship with grower and winemaker, and that was really, really great presentation. So I apologise for accidentally breaking in earlier. We will move on quite quickly. So, I mean, what's obviously most important to every grape grower is what price they're going to get, and what determines the price is what's happening on the global wine market and those bulk market prices. So I've got a great pleasure in introducing Simone George from Chianti. Like most of you, I suspect, we read the Chianti reports religiously. They are fantastic, and it informs a lot of us. So Simone, over to you.
Thank you, Tony. So today I'm going to give you a short introduction about Ciatti, and then I'm going to give you a quick trip around the world, provide you with an update on each of the relevant markets and where they are currently situated in the global market today. So who are we and what do we do? For those of you who aren't too aware of Ciatti, we are the largest bulk wine broker in the world. We've been around since 1971. We now have 9 offices around the globe, so we have a pretty good access to a lot of real-time info with our people on the ground. The head office is based in California, just north of San Francisco, and our global team is made up of 58 people. Whilst bulk wine is our forte, we also deal in the sale of grapes, a little bit with concentrate, not just grape juice concentrate, but other fruits like apple or pomegranates. We also deal with spirits, brandies, whiskies and the like, and we also do evaluation services for anyone needing reports back to the bank. So let's get started on what's happening around the world. I'll stick with home turf for starters with Australia. So the market is still quite steady. Most people in the industry are seeing good traction occurring, although it may not be at the level that they have seen in the past. There is very good demand for Chardonnay at the moment, especially for 19 or 2020, if you can find it. 2020 pricing has increased to around $1.10 per litre ex-winery, and cool climate Chardonnay is now starting to see a bit more interest too. Early in the year, Pinot Gris and Sauvignon Blanc were very popular. That is almost all sold out now as well. Dry white and dry red are high in demand off the back of a boom in cask sales and other entry-level goods. And we see a lot of people stretching out their varietal wines. A lot of this was very popular after the lockdown period that we saw here in Adelaide and the rest of the country. Most red varieties are in surplus except for Pinot Noir and dry red. Pinot has been quite high in demand from early in the year. Seems a lot of this requirement came off the back of those who were affected by smoke taint and needed bits and pieces for sparkling base. Shiraz, Cab and Merlot are all abundant, and some suppliers are willing to move quite low on pricing just to see some big batches moved out if they can. Imports from Argentina and South Africa are up. Notably, this is for dry white and dry red. Again, going into cask programs or other bits and pieces for blending. We're also seeing a bit of grape juice concentrate come into the country and some other varietal wines. When it comes down to 2021 grape pricing, still too early to tell. I guess we'll all have to wait and see. It's going to come down to how big the crush is, where we're all at with COVID and lockdowns, and also what's happening with China. So moving across to China, I won't talk about them too much, but obviously trade tensions are the biggest conversation for the week. The anti-dumping investigation. We're hearing mixed reports back from our guys in China. Some think a bottled wine tariff is imminent, some think a bulk wine tariff will follow shortly after, and some think nothing will happen for 12 months while they do this investigation. I guess we would all preempt that tariffs may occur at some point, but at what level and when, I guess no one really knows. You know, it could be 14% for bottled and 20% with bulk, and this would put us on par with, you know, French, Italy and Spain and some of our other competitors. So that would probably be the outcome I would expect. You know, you have to compare this with Chile. They still have a free trade agreement going into a lot of other countries, so they can be quite a big competitor for us there too. For China, obviously their value and volume has come down quite a lot for the first half of the year. No real surprises there considering their lockdown and the amount of celebrations they did not have. It's down 31% in volume and 32% in value. On the flip side, we've seen a massive increase for Argentinian dry red going into China. It's up a whopping 654%. Pricing for this is very good. It's around 24 to 26 US cents ex winery. So to get it over to China to say Yantai Port, that's another 14 US cents. Plus your 20% dues and taxes, you're getting it over there for US 48 cents. That's equivalent to Aussie 67. So that's pretty hard to compete against. Good news is that they're still looking for quite some volume of premium bulk from France and from Australia. But like I said, they've had quite a big drop off in Chilean imports, and that's simply because they used to buy all their dry red out of Chile, but then Argentina came along with cheap pricing and they've been bumped from that spot. So moving along to the US, they were in quite an oversupply situation prior to COVID. This comes off the back of two very big vintages in 2018 and 2019. Both were over 4 million tonnes apiece. March, they picked back up with their activity, with a lot of the larger wineries out buying again and looking to cover off the demands for the off-premise. Once again, this is a lot going into cask programs there too. If I flick to this next slide, you can see here the main demand we've seen for the for bulk in the US has been for Cabernet. That's the blue graph there. Also for Pinot Noir and for Chardonnay. There's been a big reduction in availability of Cabernet there, and most of this is coming out of the Central Valley. So that's somewhat equivalent to what our SCA material is. If you have a look at this next slide, you can see back in May, this shows our CIADI US Cabernet inventory, taking into account all regions and vintages. Back then we had over 10 million gallons, or nearly 40 million litres. Come August, that figure's halved to 5.5 million gallons, or nearly 21 million litres. So they've definitely been churning through a fair bit of Cabernet during these last couple of months. So much so that we're even seeing them bring in some imports from Chile as well. 2020 crop size expectations are for a slightly smaller crop than we have seen in the past, but their biggest issue going forward will be smoke taint. You've probably heard about the wildfires happening over there. They've got quite a few going at the moment. There are two very large ones up around the Napa Sonoma area. I think these are burning through around 340,000 acres each. Whilst I think their whites will be okay, the rosés will be okay, it won't be so good for their reds. The problem is that a lot of their winds come in through the bay, they come across that Napa Sonoma area, and then they come down the Central Valley and they get caught between the two mountains, and that smoke is just going to linger. So we could have some issues there for those guys. I know air quality is very bad, and they're even saying that they don't want their workers outside at the moment. Moving across to South America, Chile has remained quite steady and active in their market, seeing a lot of good demand come from Germany, Sweden, US, Canada, and the UK. You can see the increase by volume for these countries there on the slide, but I will note that value-wise, the pricing was down across the board for all their Chilean exports, just because they're trying to move through some stock. Sales to China has dropped a massive 65% in volume. Again, that's where a lot of their dry red was heading over to China, but now that Argentina's come along, they've been bumped from that top spot. Varieties that are good in demand are Sauvignon Blanc and Pinot, now both getting very close to being sold out. The Piso is still quite stable, but they are still having problems with COVID, so they've got a curfew overnight between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. Staying in South America, down south you've got Argentina. They're getting a lot of interest with their material, especially from Australia, UK, US, Canada, China. They have some of the cheapest generics in the world right now. As I mentioned before, they've seen a large increase of dry red over to China at the sake of Chile, and they've just pushed their way into this position with their really aggressive pricing. Malbec remains quite a strong variety, a lot of exports of that to the UK and also here to Australia. The downside for Argentina is their economy. They've been struggling with a lot of inflation, a lot of debt, and the government has recently reached an agreement with one of its biggest creditors to restructure their debt bill of US $65 billion. So they're in a little bit of trouble there. The other point to note is that Argentina trucks all their shipping containers back and forth over the mountains to the 2 times Chilean ports for export. So with solid winter snow, that border crossing has been closed, or there's delays getting back and forth from the wineries. Been a bit of an issue of late with delayed vessels. Looking at the UK, overall their alcohol sales volumes were down 1.4% and value was down 1.1%. So that's for the last 12 months. For the first 6 months of the year, we saw beer, wine and spirits grow by 4.7% in volume and 6.5% in value. Most of this growth has been around the £5 per bottle mark, but it has been increasing up to £6 per bottle. So people are spending a little bit more money, which is a good sign. Malbec's been one of the fastest growing varieties. That's up 25%, all ex-Argentina. But France and New Zealand are showing the fastest growth, with Australia still rather popular in the off-trade. And I'll show you this slide here. You can see Australia is still the preferred favourite, but we can see Chile, New Zealand and Argentina are coming up the ranks. Off-trade was up during March, April and May, anywhere between 22 and 50%, so that was part of their lockdown period as well. The good news is that they spent £7.7 billion on alcohol during the 17-week lockdown, which was an increase of nearly £2 billion compared to the same period the year before. However, the problem is this only represents around 1.3 billion litres, which is still 35% less than the 2 billion litres they purchased with the combined on and off trade for the same time last year. Moving over to France, you may have heard of the French government implementing the emergency distillation plan. So this plan basically allows the government to purchase bulk back from the sellers at a fixed price, depending on the region, in order to alleviate the lack of sales because of COVID and turn the wine into hand sanitizer. So the plan was to allocate 155 million euros towards this program and distill 200 million litres. Problem was that the government received applications totaling 320 million litres, and that was with the maximum amount of 55% of each grower's stock put forward. So the government is still in talks about this extra 120 million litres and what they're going to do. So they're supposed to have a decision finalised for that by the end of this month. You can see the pricing listed there that the government has offered. It's not too far off market value, but because of this, it's essentially paused the French bulk wine market while the government works this out. Basically, any material put forward by the grower cannot be retracted and sold elsewhere until the decision has been made by the government. Unfortunately, the 25% tariffs to US still remain in place for the Frenchies, so any wine under 14% cops that tariff. So it's fine if you've got heavy duty reds over 14, but your whites and rosés are all getting hit quite hard. A good sized 2020 harvest is expected, especially for the reds. And of course, they're still copping a bit of trouble with COVID over there, especially in Paris and Marseille. Staying in Europe, Spain, they too have an emergency distillation plan. They put 90 million euros towards this. It goes towards the distillation, storage and bunch thinning. Pricing offered there is only between 30 and 40 euro cents. So it's not quite at the mark people would like, but at least it's helping out. The government has ordered for lowered yields in 3 of the main growing regions. You can see there, Rioja, Rodia and Cava. We've got a slow market from COVID. We've got a slow market from this plan being put in place. Problem is we will have a large size crush coming out of Spain this year. They're expecting at least 4.3 billion litres. The problem is the demand between export and domestic sales only covers them to sell 3.1 billion litres. So they're in a little bit of pain there. Exports are down by 50% and on trade is down by 65%. Moving across to South Africa, they are an up and coming contender with dry white and dry red. Very competitive prices. We're seeing a lot of them come forward and looking to move on the prices that they're offering just to get rid of some larger batches of generic material. COVID's caused them quite some issues, and the government has imposed some bans on the export of goods and also the domestic consumption of wine and alcohol. These bans were on again and then they were off again multiple times over the last couple of months. So the export ban was lifted for the second time on the 1st of May, and the domestic consumption ban was just lifted recently on the 17th of August. Don't know if these bans are going to get put back in place again. We'll have to wait and see how the government sees the rest of the COVID situation setting. Problem with South Africa in the past was that they were a market that struggled with 2 years of drought and small vintages. During that drought period, they were a market that was essentially forgotten about. A lot of those buyers moved away to other supply countries to source their material and have since not returned. So South Africa is now trying to claw its way back into that market with some good pricing, and the weak rand has helped them with this. It's a little text heavy, this page, but basically I just wanted to show you the average bulk price per variety by country. Now these prices have all been converted to USD, and you can clearly see the position that Australia sits at highlighted in red. Argentina is the clear winner here on all fronts, but remember they don't have free trade agreements in all countries. They're still paying 20% duties and taxes, especially into China. Chile and South Africa are quite well priced too. So you could say that Australia's looking quite good on Chardonnay, but perhaps not so well for some of the other bits and pieces. You know, if you're a UK buyer or a German supermarket buyer, you may look at this sort of structure and say, well, Australia isn't as competitive as it could be, but we definitely have the style that hits a lot of markets at the same time. So just to sum up, generally speaking, most markets have performed quite well in the off-trade sector, but this has obviously been at a direct loss to the on-trade. From this, we've seen most demand being pushed towards entry-level price ranges, casks wine, bottled wine under 10 bucks RRP. We all know that drinkers aren't necessarily breaking out their $50 bottles of wine to stay at home and watch TV on a Wednesday night. Australia versus international competition, I think just seeing that previous slide, we obviously need to be mindful where the rest of the world is at with their pricing and how easily we can end up pricing ourselves out of the market. With regards to China, I think it's just a wait and watch type situation. I guess I would take this time to prepare for the worst and hope that that doesn't happen, but I guess we need to all have a plan B in case it does happen and something goes ahead. This would lead me to my next comment. You know, don't put all your eggs in the one basket. Make sure you have multiple sales avenues and you spread out across a lot of different countries. And again, with the 2021 crop, again, too early to tell, but we'll have to wait and see just how big it is, just where we're at with COVID, and also what happens with China. So that's it from me. There are my details on the screen. If you have any other queries, please hit me up on the email or the phone. We're always here and we're always happy to chat.
Thanks, Simone. That was terrific. As I say, I'm a great fan of all the information that Ciati put out. So yeah, keep it up. I'd just like to introduce our next presenters, Alison Sinclair and Andrew Shedden from Endeavour Drinks. Now, despite what you might think, we have a fantastic relationship with Endeavour Drinks. We work really closely on a whole lot of broader industry issues, and it's a relationship we value, probably because we're not in a competitive situation, so we don't have to argue our price. Very quickly, these two are both experts. Alison's the head of category insights for Endeavour Drinks Group, and Andrew, he's recently appointed the head of fine wine. So they really understand where the wine customer's going, what are the trends, and you know, and what we need to do to supply those customer trends, because we only exist because of the customer. So I will just introduce Alison and Andrew. Thanks very much.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Sorry, I had a bit of trouble getting myself off mute then.
All good.
Great. Well, thank you very much for having us today. We're really happy to be here to present, and Andrew and I are going to do a little bit of a tag team here and take you through a little bit of an overview of the Australian wine customer. And for those of you who don't know too much about Endeavour Drinks, we're a portfolio of retail brands, including Dan Murphy's, BWS, Langton's, Cellar Masters and Jimmy Brings, and we're basically one of the larger retailers in the country, and today we want to talk to you about our wine customers. So who they are, what they're buying and how that's changing, and also what else is piquing their interest. So who buys wine? At Endeavour Drinks, we consider our customers through two lenses, but probably worthwhile saying that over the course of the year, we have approximately 11 million customers shop for wine with us at least once over the period of that year. And really to understand them, we need to break them down because obviously that 11 million is a lot of customers. So we think about them through two different lenses, one being affluence and one life stage. And affluence is really broken down into three segments, which is budget, mainstream and premium, and is representative of socioeconomic status indicators. The second is life stage. We break that down into 7 different segments. You can see those there on the screen, but basically that's a reflection of the customer's household makeup, their age, and the presence and age of children in the family. It's our premium customers that are our most valuable affluent segment, and I think you're probably sitting there going, oh, that seems fairly obvious, but it's actually not necessarily for the reason that you might think. From an average bottle price perspective, they spend on average just $3.50 more per bottle than a mainstream customer, and their average bottle spend is $14. The fact is that these customers actually buy slightly more frequently. They visit us 8 times a year and have larger transactions, $12 more than our budget customers. And it's that driven by the number of occasions that these customers have that really does drive their value. Their annual spend is almost 2 times that of budget customers, being approximately $300 per year. They're most likely to buy across more than one subcategory. We know that, as an example, budget customers are only likely to buy red or white wine, not necessarily buy all, whereas our premium customers are more engaged with the category and therefore buy across not only more subcategories, but more varietals. They also purchase across more price bands. And the reason they do that is because they know wine a lot better than some of our budget customers, and therefore they use certain price points for certain purposes. So that's why they buy across more price bands. So they're our most engaged and therefore our most valuable wine customer of all of the 3 affluent segments. If you look at this chart, it basically tells you the size of the customer base split out by these segments and also the value of those customers. So you can see that our mainstream customers are actually our greatest share of the number of customers, but they represent 39% and 40% of the sales. But it's premium customers who represent just 37% of our customer base, but 44% of our sales. And I talked earlier about the subcategories that they purchase. You can see there that premium customers have the greatest participation rate across subcategories. In fact, across every subcategory except for cask. So you can see, as an example, 63% of our premium customers purchase red wine, and that's of our total liquor premium customers. Whereas for budget customers, just 34% of those customers actually purchase red wine. From an affluence perspective, from a life stage perspective, it's our older customers with more experience in the category who spend more than our younger customers. They're our most valuable customers. And that's coming from experience, confidence, interest in the category, and it results in more occasions, similar to what we saw with our premium customers. Our older singles and couples are our highest spenders in the wine category, driven by their frequency of shop. They're not our biggest spenders by average bottle price. In fact, new families spend the most per bottle and retirees spend the least. New families spend approximately $14 a bottle, whereas retirees are closer to $10 a bottle. The average annual spend of an older single and couple is around $330 with us at Endeavour. And that represents 42% of their total liquor spend within the wine, happening within the wine category. For context, it's actually retirees who spend most of their total liquor dollars within the wine category, and they're spending 50% of their liquor spend on wine. Here's a similar chart to what we saw earlier around affluence, but this is through the lens of life stage. And you can see that older single and couple, who represents just 24% of our customer base, actually representing 31% of share of the value of those segment, of our spend within wine. And you can see that retirees and older families also overrepresented in terms of the value they represent to us versus the actual size of the customer base. And again, it's similar to what we saw with the premium customers. they're more likely to engage with more subcategories. Interestingly, those younger customers are the first ones moving into things like sake, and we can see them engaging much more with things like rosé. The challenge we have is that by 2025, 52% of the Australian drinking age population will actually be Gen Z or millennials, replacing boomers as the largest customer demographic. And the question is, are we as a collective prepared for that? These younger customers allocate the lowest percentage of their liquor spend to wine, just 27%. But the positive is when they do purchase wine, they're actually open to spending more per bottle, and they look to experiment with flavours and styles. Their average bottle price is actually $13.50. These customers are less likely to drink what their parents drank. They're driven by trends and what's new, and they're our most experimental customers when it comes to emerging varietals. I'll hand over to Andrew. He's going to take you through what they're buying and how that's changing.
Thanks, Ellie. And thanks, Tony, for having us. I don't know if you can actually see it, but I've got a shirt with a collar on. It's the first time I've had a collar this lockdown. It's been a long lockdown. So good to be here. As Ellie said, I'll talk to you about what they are buying. We could have taken this from a few different lenses, but obviously with a grower audience, we thought varietal was probably the right way to go. So what this slide is talking to you about, this is what we call a customer penetration graph. So this is basically either in red, white or sparkling, or then by varietal underneath it, what percentage of shoppers who shop wine with us shop into these segments. So you can really see what they're buying. Probably the first interesting thing is it always gets me by surprise when Ali presents this every quarter to us. But the customer penetration in white wine at over half of our wine customers is higher than red. Obviously value, we often think about a large portion of it being associated with red because of higher bottle prices, but in terms of customer penetration, more customers in white. If I look at some of the high level trends, probably in each of those three buckets really quickly. First thing to note in red wine, I mean, obviously you can see the size of customer penetration for Shiraz and Cab Sav. They're leading the way. It's been the case for a long time. I'm sure it'll be the case for a long time to come. But what's really coming underneath that is Pinot Noir. Again, no surprise, but that just continues to grow and grow and grow in terms of customer penetration. And then secondly, Grenache we see as the next lighter style red that's really starting to jump on the back of Pinot Noir. We're seeing a lot of Pinot customers now branch into Grenache. Probably the good news for the red customer is that you'll see the penetration number there is pretty flat year on year. So even though there's a lot of people that are buying out of Shiraz and Cab Sav into these lighter style reds, what we're really seeing in the red wine drinker is more a diversification of occasion, if you like. So they're finding new ways to drink red and new occasions for red, rather than a binary transaction out of, say, a Shiraz into a Pinot Noir. That's probably not so much the case for white wine. As you can see at the top, a slight reduction in customer penetration. And really on a high level, what we're seeing is a decline over time in Sauvignon Blanc from what you can see there is a very, very high peak, and some decline in Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon blends as well. And there's not that tail of different varietals that there is in red to pick up that slack in white. Pinot Gris, Pinot Grigio is doing a really good job in growing, just not quite growing at the rate to offset that decline in Sauvignon Blanc in particular. Sparkling, Prosecco is the big story to call out. There's been a lot of movement within sparkling. You can see Envy down there and in the fourth bucket on the right. You can see Champagne down as well, but Prosecco's done a huge amount to offset a lot of that decline. And it's really attracting that young customer that Ali was just talking about on the last slide, as is Spritz. You can see that they're obviously coming off a low base, but there's some huge opportunities for innovation in that space in particular, to really try and capture the attention of that younger customer who is becoming more and more important. We then pulled this table together for you today to show you that if that's the high level trends on the last slide, well, what are they doing within that? So where are we seeing the customers switching in and out of different varieties? So again, I'll talk red first, which is on the left side, and then I'll talk white. What you've got listed in that first column is all of the varieties that are experiencing a positive switch. So you're getting more people moving in than moving out, and that's in descending order as well. What you'll probably notice there is, I referenced it in the last slide, but this lighter style red wine phenomenon really starting to gain some pace. Pinot and Grenache leading it, but there is a long tail of different varieties in reds that customers who traditionally might have just been Shiraz or Cab Sav drinkers are now starting to experiment into. What you can see then on the next three columns is what they're switching out of. As I referenced before, even though they're switching out of Shiraz and Cab Sav, that's more to do with the fact that they've been so big historically, and we're not necessarily seeing significant declines in those traditional varieties. It's more the spread of the red wine occasions I discussed before. Again, if you then move across to white wine, it's the same structure. What you may notice is there's probably not the tail of white varietals that is really picking up the slack from the decline in Sauv Blanc and white blends here. What's not listed in this, because this is obviously a wine presentation, is well, you're getting some bleeding across to Rosé and Pinot Gris and Pinot Grigio. As Ali called out earlier, you're also getting customers that are moving out of white wine, and they're moving into things like to gin, to whiskey, to vodka, to craft beer in particular. So that's a really big watch out for, I think, all of us collectively, is how do we retain this customer in wine, and at the moment in white wine in particular. Having said that, and then just spoken about trends and really emphasised lighter styles of red, we wanted to pull this graph together just to show you and really emphasise the size of prize that is still in those traditional varietals. So if you read from sort of the bottom colours up, you've got Shiraz, you've got Cabernet. If you then skip past Pinot, you've then got Shiraz blends and Cabernet blends, or that in reverse order. So you can see there is still a significant amount of the total sales that we have for red wine drinkers associated with Shiraz, Cab Sav, or blends of the two. So that's not going away, and that trend won't change anytime soon. But having said that, you can still see some movement, particularly when you look across affluence and life cycle, like Ali talked to earlier. Now, it's a busy slide, but there's probably just two really key things I wanted to point out for red. Firstly, if you look at the premium column in affluence, and then maybe also look at the young singles and couples column, because as Ali said before, we're moving to a situation where those younger customers are going to become the majority customer by 2025. And the premium customers are the most important ones for us and for the industry, and the ones most likely to drink across the full breadth of wine. And in both of them, you can see a significant over-index in Pinot Noir versus your more traditional varietals. And also right at the top of the graph, you can see all of those little colours. That's basically that tail of other varietals. You can see that they massively over-index in other more interesting or less traditional, if you like, varietals. So while we understand the big prize over here, you can see where some of these very important consumers are moving going forward. White wine, again, it's a similar story in that Sauvignon Blanc, even though I just said was in some level of decline in terms of customer penetration, it's still massive. It's easily the biggest variety within white wine for us in terms of sales, followed by Chardonnay and PG. There's probably two other things, just to go off piece really quickly, that are worth pointing out that don't necessarily thread back to what we've been talking about, but I just wanted to quickly point it out. Is one, if you see that lighter sort of Richie Benaud style off-white colour, is Moscato and Sweet. We never really talk about this when we talk about trends going forward, but I don't think we can ever appreciate the importance that plays in particularly young people and budget customers as people enter into the category. So more mature drinkers have moved well and truly beyond that, but it is still, there is a large segment of customers who really buy into that level of sweetness, and how we maybe get a bit of innovation playing in that space to make sure that we continue to bring people into wine is going to be really important. Chardonnay is the other really quick one that's probably worth touching on. Big over-index in older customers. Again, as Ellie said earlier, people who are older are more confident and more experienced in their wine journey, and they'll play with wine varietals that are maybe higher priced and have got the potential to be really, really great. Under-indexed though in younger customers. So what's the challenge there is for us is to how do we sell in the great story of Chardonnay to younger customers, because that's where we're seeing some of our best expressions of Australian wine at the moment. But really, probably the final thing to land, and it's a continuation of what we were saying before, is you can see the massive under-index in Sauvignon Blanc in younger customers on this graph. They're moving away from what their parents were drinking. And as I've said a couple of times, we've got a real challenge here in white to make sure that we're giving them alternatives that they're happy with and that appeal to them, so that we can continue to stimulate growth in the white category.
Great, thanks, Andrew. So just moving on to a couple of the macro trends and what else is piquing customers' interest in terms of wine. And we've been considering a lot of this as we've considered the impact of COVID on customer behaviour. And what we're really seeing is this idea of a flight to value versus a flight to values. So for the customer who's been financially impacted or is conservative based on economic uncertainty, we're actually seeing that customer look for greater value in what they're purchasing. That doesn't mean they're buying the cheapest wine possible. It just means that they might be considering their choices and potentially looking at different pack sizes or different pricing mechanics. On the other hand, the customer who's been less impacted is really starting to think about the values that they have and considering what they can do to give back to the community at this point in time. And therefore, there's a number of trends that we see are really being accelerated in this environment. And these trends were ones we were looking at before COVID hit, but they've kind of accelerated throughout COVID. And the ones that we're going to pay particular attention to today, just a couple of them, is local and health and wellbeing. So from a local perspective, customers are demonstrating a heightened sense of responsibility to protect local producers and small businesses. And we can see in our sales data in the time of lockdown that customers were looking to smaller wine producers and smaller wine brands than they were looking to big brands. And we saw the growth of those smaller producers actually accelerate much faster than those of the big companies. And we think about local as kind of two different dimensions, particularly for wine. One is locally relevant. Three from a total liquor perspective, but two are very important for wine. One is locally relevant. One is provenance, and the other is on my doorstep local. And provenance and on my doorstep are the ones that are really relevant to the wine category. Provenance talks to the customer's desire to really know the origins and the processes and the stories of the products. And on my doorstep really relates to that desire to support the local communities and businesses and industries in the community. And we're seeing both of those play a role. We're looking at customers who are wanting greater provenance in their products, but also they're actually really worried about local producers and small businesses that they might like to support. And we're seeing that happen across all categories. And the growth of craft beer, as an example, is growing exponentially through the COVID period. Already was, but is growing faster now. If we look at the second one being health and wellbeing, customers are really reducing their intake of liquor. And whether it be through abstinence, cutting back the amount they drink on an occasion, or cutting back the number of occasions they have, we have to really think about how we stay relevant with a customer who's exhibiting those kinds of behaviours. And we've seen beer and spirits face into this really well with mid-strength, light, lower ABV, zero alcohol products. And we've also seen that happen in spirits with brands like Seedlip. So we need to really consider how wine faces into that. We know it's a really difficult process to come up with lighter in alcohol styles and no alcohol alternatives, but we know our customers are looking for those products. And while the most obvious element of health and wellbeing is that alcohol content, there's also other lifestyle elements that we consider around things like vegan, organic, biodynamic, minimal intervention, other lo-fi winemaking processes that are high on our radar for customers who are looking for great quality products that align with their lifestyles and values. And Andrew, you might like to take everyone through just some other areas of interest for us this year.
Yeah, really, really quickly. Lighter styles I touched on before in red, but also in white. And then, as I said, that challenge is how do we start to get that fractionalisation in white the same way as we did in red. Scale rosé. Rosé, 5-10 years ago, I'm not sure was fully taken seriously as a wine style or offering. Boy, has that changed. Rosé is massive, and we've seen a huge boom in that the last 5 years. That's only going to continue to grow. So how do we start to really scale up rosé? Lo-fi wines we're using as our catch-all. Again, this probably plays into that younger demographic again. This is a bit of a catch-all for wine styles that go against the grain. So be that, you know, your pet nats, skinsy wines, orange or amber, mint intervention, etc., etc. Just wines that go against the grain and really appeal to that younger customer. We're trying to find as many of them as we can to really increase our offering there. And then, yeah, alternative packs and sizes. So how do we start to either on, say, a sustainability or environmental lens, start to think about how do we get innovative there to play our part as a total industry, but also how do we offer pack sizes that are appropriate to the modern consumer? Be they celebrating, so the reinvigoration of things like a Magnum, or be they, like me, in lockdown in Victoria at the moment, trying to moderate. So half bottles or the return of the cask or whatever it may be. How do we start to think about being innovative around the way that we're serving wine to our customers? So that's the focus for us. And thanks for our little whistle stop tour. So we're a little bit over.
No, look, thank you very much. That was fascinating. In fact, all three presenters in this session, indeed for the whole time, have been great. I've certainly learned a lot and really appreciate the time from all the presenters. Well, look, we've got time for a couple of quick questions if people are prepared to stay online. First of all, there's one for Simone, and that's it. Do we have a plan B for with emerging? A couple of comments on emerging markets. Do we have a potential plan B alternative if China all goes to hell and high water? So one for you, Simone. No, Simone? We'll take that one on notice then. Paula, we got a couple for you. First of all is, there was a lot of discussion about the PPSR and the retention of title. And one of the questions was for actually me was, is that issue being addressed in the new code wording? It's not, because we can't address everything, but it's certainly something we'll be encouraging growers to negotiate with the buyers. One though, Paula, there's a question here, a really good one, is can a contract ever effectively substitute for good relationships in the sense of the longer term sustainability for each business?
Probably not. The contract just defines the relationship. It becomes, I guess, it sets the standards that you're around your relationship, really.
Yeah, and I guess another one, which was, how do you move a potential buyer to a buyer? So what do you do if a buyer is keen to purchase but then changes their mind just before the contract, apart from tear your hair out?
Oh, look, I think, getting something in writing quickly is always beneficial, but it's very hard until you get it signed as a contract. You are in the lap of the gods, really, waiting for them to say yes. I guess it's, you know, as growers, we have choice. Historically, we tend to go to the same thing all the time. So actually stepping out and shopping around is probably a good thing. A lot of people don't want to deliver out of the city limits of their towns, and there's a big wide world out there that you could go and sell your fruit to.
Yeah, I agree with that one. Another good question. This is probably primarily at EDG, but, you know, are the younger drinkers concerned with wines with certain GIs, or is it more about other things like the what's socially responsible, environmental, or what's just new? Any insights into that?
Ed, do you want me to take that one? I do think that that they are thinking about GI, but I think some of those other things sometimes trump it a little bit, and some of that, or by nature, that GI becomes an important part of the proposition that they're buying into. They spend at a higher price point, and therefore a lot of those components are wrapped up in the wines that they buy. If you think about some of those emerging varietals, some of those are very distinct in where they come from. So by nature, they are therefore learning about GI and regionality. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, and another one, I mean, there's obviously a lot of interest in purchasing behaviour and consumers, and particularly with the increase in younger consumers, do you expect their purchasing frequency in wine to increase over time? You know, will they transition like through beer to wine? And what about, you know, Gen Zs and millennials? We're obviously wondering what will happen to them, or will they just be different to what we've had before? And if you knew that, you'd be millionaires.
No, it's a really interesting question. I think you do see that natural transition over time. I think historically you've seen that in our consumers, but I'd caution not to take that for granted. I think we are potentially seeing a wild card in this generation. So we may get some transition, but I'm honestly, nervous is probably a bit too much, but I am cautious around some of the patterns we're seeing in Gen Z and millennials. I'm also cautious about some of the innovation that I'm seeing in some of the other categories that are driving the attention of these consumers, particularly in the spirits category, in beer around craft, but particularly in the spirits category and in the premix category as well. There's some stuff going on there that's blurring the lines between what is a spirit, what is a wine even, what is a beer, and that's really piquing the interest of this generation. So I think it would be folly if we weren't all watching this very closely and trying to react to make sure that we're garnering the attention of this generation.
And I guess as a follow-up to that, given that real interest in health, if you like, and with healthy consumption, which is we've seen with the growth in the certainly the no alcohol spirits, but also the hard, basically, your mineral waters and a bit of flavouring and alcohol. Does that mean that there's an expectation that wine will need to move down that wine product route? That will be a much bigger growth area?
Yeah, I do think that there is an expectation that wine will join in that party. I think that our customers are looking for, in those occasions where they don't want to drink, but they want to be part of the occasion, that they will look to all categories. And it's, I guess, the categories that can service their needs best will win in those types of occasions. So it would be good for us if we had a wine alternative that could play to that occasion. So it's definitely on our radar to try and secure something that can hold those customers in the wine category, because we have a responsibility to make sure that we build a sustainable, or continue to be responsible for the sustainability of the wine category, and therefore we're interested in trying whatever angles we possibly can to bring more customers into and retain customers within the wine category.
Yeah, thanks. And I think that's particularly important for grape growers, because at the end of the day, we need people keep buying grapes to produce the alcohol that will go into these products. And if it's not traditional wine, that doesn't really matter. It's what the consumer wants. Look, we've reached the end of our time, and I really thank everyone for their patience in here. We will be sending out the recordings and answers to the questions. We'll also be sending out a survey. So if there's something that you want to see us, you want to see this again, and how to do it, please let us know. We're very happy to hold this type of activity. Look, and also really grateful to all the speakers. I think it was just fantastic. Appreciate your time. You've done a great job, and I found it fascinating. So I'll give you a virtual clap, and thank you very much. And everyone, thank you for your time, and we'll close the session now.
Thanks, Tony.
Thank you.